on this episode of the Business Communicators.
But what was fascinating is he gave me 3 pieces of advice. He said, Kate, I don't care what you want to study, but never burn a bridge. You live and die by your Rolodex, and you must know how to sell something.
You're listening to the Business Communicators. And now your hosts, Austin Stetton, Hattie Horn, and Thomas Bain.
Welcome to Season 4, Episode 17 of the Business Communicators, the #1 podcast in the world for communications and marketing professionals. My name is Austin Stetton, and in just a few moments, Hattie Horn and Thomas Bain will take the reins on this journey as we explore the world of communications and discuss the key issues and trends that impact our industry. Hattie and Thomas are going to sit down shortly with branding expert Kate DiLeo, who is the author of the upcoming book, Muting the Megaphone, which you can find in all outlets this July. So be sure to check that out. In the show notes below, we'll leave a link to Kate, all of her information, and where you can find the book as well. But if you want to follow our work, we recommend that you follow us on social media. Just search @BizCommunicator on all of the social media platforms. You can find each episode there, show notes, clips, so on and so forth. And of course, you can find everything that you need at thebusinesscommunicators.com. You can go ahead and subscribe to that. And of course, we want show ideas. If you have guest ideas or comments, questions, anything that you liked or didn't like, we have thick skin. Let us know by shooting us an email. And you can email me directly at austin@thebusinesscommunicators.com. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get to today's interview. So we'll go ahead and turn it over to Hattie and Thomas as they sit down with Kate DiLeo.
You're listening to the Business Communicators.
Today's guest of the Business Communicators is Kate DiLeo, who is called the Accidental Brand Strategist. She originally intended to pursue a PhD in anthropology, but she fell in love with the power of branding during her first sales job, which is awesome. And in the pursuit of making quota, she realized she needed to cut through the noise with a message that would compel prospects to want to have a conversation. And with that, she was out of a job. She overcame, honed her craft, and went on to successfully manage millions in pipeline by delivering a simple pitch that invited prospects to engage in a compelling conversation. The pitch, which Kate calls the brand trifecta, is rooted in her firm belief that brand is the path of least resistance to revenue. And more importantly, she just wrote a book, and it's called Muting the Megaphone. Stop telling stories and start having conversations. And that's set to be released next month in July. Kate, we are so happy to have you with us today. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
One of the first questions for you, which I think is that you call yourself the accidental, brand strategist. So can you tell our listeners a little bit about, again, even though I said a little bit, I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. And why do you think that's something that is so important?
Well, I think first off, I'm 36. I'm an older millennial. And I think like many of us who are entrepreneurs or in the business space, many of us have had a very zigzag career path. I mean, I didn't have this perfectly straight line. I wanted to do a PhD in anthropology, and specifically everything that I had been working for was to teach in academia linguistic anthropology, which is founded on this crazy philosophy that culture shapes language and language shapes culture. But when the market crashed, honestly, I had a professor that said, listen, love you. We don't know where this field is going to be, let alone if you're going to find a position teaching. You should leave and go get a job and pay off your school debt, which, of course, my Italian father was like, I love you. Yes, please leave my house and please pay off your debt. We love you so much. Bye-bye. So that was the beginning. I'm an accident because it was not until I got into corporate America and started to try and build the semblance of a sales career that I actually fell upon the power of branding as the fastest way for me to be successful in reaching my target audiences.
You say accidental, and I really think that it's almost your destiny. And the reason I say that is because if you said you're going to be a linguistics anthropologist, and marketing, communications, advertising is all about linguistics and how to communicate your message. And so I find it fascinating that if we look at like the history of marketing, where it was the sign out front of the tavern that has a beer mug, or the sign outside the blacksmith that was the horseshoe,
right?
And how today brands are moving more and more to that direction. And how can we get our message across as quickly as possible? So while I think accident is great, I also think it might be a little more directed than what you're even giving yourself credit for.
You might be right. I mean, it is funny. I think at this stage, doing this work now for over a decade, both when it was for many years a side hustle and then finally my full-time business. It's funny to see it come full circle, isn't it? And I think for a lot of us in business, we realize the further on we go that there's elements of those beginning stages that maybe we took for granted or we didn't think we'd ever really use. And here they are and they're popping up and going, wow, the relevancy of maybe everything that I've walked through to bring me to this point is pretty cool.
What's really, really interesting to me is that in some form or fashion, everybody thinks they're a great marketer.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to hear from you about your path and what makes you stand out.
Okay, so you ready for this? I don't consider myself a marketer. Okay, hold on. I'm serious. And in the sense that, Hattie, okay, I've always been in sales first. I took a job out of necessity. I literally took a job and I was like, I've got to go pay my debt. Let me go dive into sales. And by the way, it was funny. I was raised by a serial entrepreneur. My dad was a great entrepreneur and to this day in his 70s still consults. But what was fascinating is he gave me 3 pieces of advice. He said, Kate, I don't care what you want to study, but never burn a bridge. You live and die by your Rolodex, and you must know how to sell something. And I think it was sage advice. And so I thought, well, I'll go get a sales job. But here's the thing. As a marketer or a professional that now helps companies do branding, I think what helps me stand out is the fact that I'm a pragmatist. I do not view branding as fluff. I do not view branding as storytelling. I do not view branding as paragraph upon paragraph of content that's supposed to be fluffy and creative. No, your brand truly is your path of least resistance to revenue. It is the stuff that when somebody hits the homepage of your website or meets you in a meeting or a Zoom room, that you clearly can articulate, this is what we do, this is how we solve your problem, and this is how we're different. And you guys, I really think that is what people want to know to want to take the next step.
Help me understand, when you're working with companies or working with brands, what are some of the things when you step into the room or when you're talking to them, what do you think that they're doing wrong?
Well, it's such a big question. Let's see if I can attack this in a couple examples, right? So I think in general, when we find that brands are in this position where they're coming to me and they're saying things like, I'm struggling to get prospects to the table, or gosh, my sales cycle's really long. What's happening? Or, hey, Kate, the message that we used to say, it's not working. We're not seeing the same conversion rates, or we're not seeing the same number of prospects coming. Or, oh, we have this new product or service. Okay, so all of those are indicators that you need to go look at your brand message. And when we look at that, a couple of the big common themes that I find are this. Number one, very often I think companies get too focused on their competition. They're extremely concerned with what the competition is saying and doing versus really taking a step back and going, who am I authentically? Because if I show up authentically, like attracts like, I'm going to have a higher probability of delivering a message that's going to resonate with my ideal buyer. I think number 2, the other biggest fear or thing that might be going wrong is doing what we call storytelling marketing. Listen, I love the concept of storytelling. Donald Miller came out with the book Story Brand. And the whole premise is put your customer at the heart of this, right? It's all about them. I think the problem with that, though, is we've taken it and run with it in such a way where we've made it all about us. And so you see this complex language and paragraph upon paragraph of content. You're going, this poor person reading this is going, overwhelm. You lost me.
So what are some tips you would give to executives to cut through that mirror view of themselves to help guide that conversation more on the customer focused?
All right. So there's kind of when we think about how you deliver a really solid brand, whether you are a leader of a business unit, you're the CEO of your own organization, wherever you're at, right? You're head of marketing, the head of sales. When we talk about getting your brand pitch down, I think there's a couple big buckets of work. I think number 1, you've got to know your tone of voice for your own brand. So meaning how do you guys show up as a company anyway? If you're a blue pen, you can't write in a red pen. So knowing authentically your own tone of voice, if you're serious or playful, is really important, because the tendency is when you start to write, it just sounds very corporate-y, doesn't it? And so you do want to make sure that you know your tone of voice. Number two, I actually think you have to take a step back and really ask yourself, who am I trying to target and why? Who's my ideal target audience? And have I really defined that clearly with a set of buyer criteria that in an ideal state, this is the ideal buyer that's going to come and work with me? And then finally, you need to synthesize and write that brand. And you guys, here's the recommendation that I have for anybody who's trying to get their pitch down. There's 3 big components that you need to have in a specific order for somebody to want to wake up, listen, and take the next step. And it is this. Number 1, you need a tagline that clearly says, this is what we do. Number 2, you need a value proposition statement that says, this is how we solve your problem. And then finally, number 3, you need a set of differentiator statements, sometimes called like your 3 uniques. The 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 big bullets of how you are different and better than the rest. That is the stuff. It's not a lot. The 1, 2, 3 of how do you write a brand and speak a brand that actually is going to get more of the right prospects to the table.
Let's talk about your book.
Sure.
Muting the Megaphone. There are lots of books out there that are trying to tell people what they should do and how they should approach their brands and telling stories. What is the biggest takeaway from your book that may be different or maybe not?
Sure. So
you should get.
Yeah. So again, this book is actually, it's a short and sweet 100-page tactical book. I'm a firm believer in if I can give tactics, that's the best thing. So the idea here is you should be able to highlight everything in there. So this is jam-packed full, literally step-by-step. How do you actually write your brand? Yes, there's going to be strategy and theory in terms of high level why I'm telling you to build it this way. But I actually get into the nuts and bolts of how do you craft the language? How do you write sentences in terms of structure? And then how do you take that brand and deploy it across digital, face-to-face, print channels? So this is a very tactical, hands-on book.
So a book you could read in a flight, from an hour-long flight, not across the globe flight.
Yes, it should really be your pocket brand guide. It should be the thing that you can keep coming back to and go, hold on, if we go look at our tagline, is it structured the right way? Hang on a second. Is it really answering the question what we do? Wait a second. Do we have differentiators on our website, or are we listing paragraphs of features and benefits? Hold on. How do we order this?
The joy of our podcast is each of us have like different areas of expertise. And I'm probably going to tip my hat on which my area of expertise is with this question. How do you help consult the companies you're talking to measure the success? Because branding is so top of funnel, so very, very top of the funnel.
Oh my gosh.
And
this is so great.
And you were talking about long lead times, and branding, can have a really long lead time. And so it's like, how do you help convince these executives to stay the course, that it is working? Here are the KPIs, here are the measurements, to truly understand what it is. And I'm sorry about the dog. He seems to bark every time there is.
He knows what's going on. He knows it's this time. For me, when I look at this, and I'm a big believer in KPIs and metrics. So when you have a brand, first what I would say is, for the love of Pete, do not go update your brand. If you implement a new brand message, please let it sit for a solid 60 to 90 days before you start tweaking stuff. Like, we know this is kind of basic, but I love it when I get fellow brand enthusiasts and they're trying to tweak word upon word upon word like every 2 days. And I go, how are you supposed to track if it's actually working or not? So, okay, if you've done your best and you put it out into the world, the biggest indicators in B2B, for example, are going to be, number one, you should see an increased number of qualified prospects that come to the table. Point blank, if somebody sees your message and they deeply resonate with it at a heart level, like you're calling out the heart pain you solve, and at that point, they're at a different point of readiness, aren't they? They should be able to look at your message and go, oh my God, you read my mail. So number one, you should see a qualified prospect coming that has the particular pain that you solve and a particular readiness to buy. Number two, then, what follows behind that my clients have seen is an increased close rate. Clearly, if you have a more qualified prospect that saw your message, comes to the table, higher likelihood of closing, right? And then third, we see actually a decrease in sales cycle time in B2B services. Think about it this way. You meet somebody in a Zoom room, you deliver your brand pitch verbally. What are they going to do? They're going to go stalk you on the website, right? And they say, yeah, oh my gosh, I'd love to chat with you. They hold a Zoom call with you. This happens all the time, even in SaaS, by the way. If they get on that call and they're holding a demo with you still, or they still want to chat with you, they are no longer starting the question by saying, oh, Kate, tell me what you do. They're going, okay, I saw that video and I loved what you said. So here's what we're dealing with, Kate, right? Like, this is what our specific pain. How would you fix that? Now, do you see how they're further along in the buying process and they're more bought in? So instead of you having to have 1, 2, 3 calls to get them to the point where they're bought in on this, it's usually one call into proposal. And that's what we want to see if your brand is working.
What are some of the industry groups that you work with the most, and where have some of your biggest challenges been?
Okay, so I do work a lot with technology companies, which is fascinating, but that's crossed over tons of sectors. So for example, fintech, healthcare tech, med tech. I mean, it's been all over the place. SaaS products, B2C apps, you name it. It's been all over the place. But if there's a technology component, it's straight up my alley. And I typically love it because I love working with engineers and technology founders that are just smart and are visionary and have this really complex and cool thing that they need to tell in a succinct story. And that's hard, isn't it? How do I tell a complex story quickly? All right, one of the biggest challenges that we face typically when branding in anything that's technology related is the order of operation, the order of content. So making sure that, how do I say this? We're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater where I'm saying, oh yes, don't have any features and benefits on your website. No. What we do is we have to systematically, when we build a brand, have the 3 main components on your homepage, such as a tagline, what you do, value proposition statement, what problem you solve, differentiator statements, how you're different.
Mm-hmm.
But then what we want to do next is still have a robust set of information below and around that they can take the next step with. It's more about getting people to the place where they go, okay, now I care to actually read all of those cool charts and features and benefits lists and watch that explainer video. And the job of our brand is to just get them there in 20 seconds or less. That is the biggest challenge. Not getting rid of too much technical content, but putting it into the right order for when somebody's at a point of readiness to care.
Where do you see the future of marketing communications going? You see all the next shiny object, hey, virtual reality. You see the big cartoons about, we really shouldn't have had this meeting right after South by Southwest. So where do you see the future of marketing communications going?
I think it's going to go back to simple days. And what I mean by that is I just firmly believe that nobody wants to be in a sales funnel and that everybody wants a seat at the table. So yes, we will have technology components that allow for a seat at the table. We will see more about interactive chat. We will find more ways for people to have an actual conversation. But the precipice of my book, and that I've seen for the last 10 years, is the shift away from just sales funnel galore back into this place where people are realizing, even with COVID, I got more business done in a half-hour Zoom room conversation than I did running in a cold email campaign to people I had no business talking to. I'm not saying digital tactics aren't great. They are good. But we just have to be thoughtful about this. Not what tactics we're using, but what rooms are our audiences already in, digitally or otherwise. And if we figure out the rooms, if it behooves us to show up in a CEO mastermind and teach a workshop, and that's how we get people on the phone with us, do that. Leverage that. I think it's what people want. They want conversation.
I've got a question, and it kind of brings back full circle, going back to the anthropology side of it.
Sure.
In 100 years, 1,000 years from now, what kind of messaging do you think people who are looking back on our lives right now are going to think about us? Because it is based off of what marketing communications and lifestyles were taking place. The old frescoes that you see in Pompeii and those kind of things. What kind of messaging, what do you think the future is going to hold for what people are judging us 100 years from now, 1,000 years ago?
I think if they painted a fresco of people in our time, a bunch of sales and business professionals, and you had a fresco in the Vatican with a bajillion angels and business professionals, can you imagine us with all wings, right? I think that we would be very exhausted with bags under our eyes, and we would look very tired, and we would look very haggard, and we'd all look like we're running 1,000 miles an hour. And I think what people would really recognize is that you got to slow down, step back, and just get back to the basics. that's what I honest to God people are going to think.
That's the perfect way to end our conversation. But for anybody who wants to reach out to you, get in touch with you, buy the book, everything like that, this is your time. Plug it. We'll put all the stuff in the show notes down below, and hopefully you'll see some leads coming from talking to us today.
No, I appreciate it. Well, listen, honestly, the easiest way to find me, you can find me on LinkedIn. I would love for you to connect with me. If you're a listener and a follower of the podcast and you have a question on branding, please reach out. I would love that. And then, of course, you can take a look at my website for more information on my book, where I'm speaking this year around the country. And that is KateDiLeo.com.
Well, thank you, Kate, for joining us. This has been a fun conversation. You've had a very interesting journey so far, and it was fun listening and hearing about it. And we really thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, too. I appreciate the opportunity.
You're listening to the Business Communicators.
Special thanks to Kate DiLeo for joining us on this episode of the podcast. And I'm a little jealous of Hattie and Thomas for getting to take part in that interview. Kate had a lot of energy, provided really practical tips, whether you're a communications professional, whether you're a branding expert, whether you're a marketer, or even if you're in sales. So we really encourage you to check out our upcoming book, Muting the Megaphone, which you can find this July on Amazon and so many other platforms. But if you want to connect with Kate, we suggest that you go to our website, connect with her on LinkedIn, and of course, we'll include all of that information in the show notes below. But hat tip to Hattie and Thomas for taking over this week while I was a little tied up with work. So shout out to them, and look forward to being back on the microphone with all three of us here in just a few weeks. But if you want to follow our work, just search @Biz Communicator on all of the social media platforms. You'll find us there. And go ahead and subscribe to our website at thebusinesscommunicators.com. But on behalf of our guest this week, Kate DiLeo, and my co-host, Hattie Horn, Thomas Bain, my name's Austin Staton. We'll see you next week.
You've been listening to the Business Communicators. If you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe to our podcast on iTunes and leave us a 5-star review.